Thank you and good evening. It's a great honor to be here and a real pleasure to be here with Jane Campion. I'd like to begin with the first clip. Can we get right into the first clip, please? Sure.
This was supposed to have a 185 mask on it. Some of you may have noticed the boom.
Jane, in the last couple of weeks, I've had really the great pleasure of going back over and seeing all your work again and seeing it in a concentrated period. And seeing Peel again, I was so struck by what a Jane Campion movie it is. I mean, in so many ways, so many of the things that I treasure about your work, the kinds of compositions, the sudden explosions of odd angles, the kind of family tension, so much was there in that first film. I'm wondering, talk about how you got up to Peel. First of all, how did you find your way into movies from earlier experience, I know, at art school and in painting, some other kinds of work?
I actually had made another film before this one. I was telling Bruce about it before. It was Super 8 film and my very first experience with film at all. And everything I did in that film totally charmed me. I just thought it was fabulous. Every last frame of it, you know. It was, I think my last experience, the innocence of that experience is still treasured to me because I had no sense of critique. Just like, they're in the frame, you know. Hey! Great! You know? And you get back to film, it's developed! And then they're almost talking in sync. You know, like their lips are moving and the sounds are kind of coming out at the same time. And I mean, it's rough, but it's there. And then I showed this film around so proudly. I mean, it's the last time I've been able to do that. I mean, I just would love showing it. It is a funny little film, and it is really as much me as anything else I've ever made, you know. I can never manage these scarves. And, no, I've forgotten. Oh, no, I remember now. And then I showed it to somebody. Someone said, oh, I know someone who knows something about film. I was like, oh, wow. Show it to them then. That'll be so great. I used to take my camera around, my Super 8 projector in the car with me, you know, in case anyone wanted to see it with the film.
Like on the side of the road or... You know,
yeah, anywhere, you know, like you go to someone's place, do you want to see a film? Show you a film. And this guy was sort of like, you know, hairy and weird and, you know, been to film school in London. And I showed him the film and he was sort of, you know, like this about it, not like my normal buddies who go, oh, yeah, it's great. You know? And he went, don't have many wide shots in it. And that's all he said, you know. And that was the end of it for me. That was it. Wide shots? What are they, you know? What's a wide shot? They're all the same size. I mean, they're all in the same square, you know? What could he be talking about? It was just like crazy to me. And then, you know, I started going, oh, what's a wide shot, you know, and finding out more about it. And then I went like, oh, I see, you know, oh, there's close-ups and there's wide shots and there's framing and there's, you know, lighting and there's composition. You know, like. And then I started looking back over the films that I loved and started analysing them and trying to understand what put them together. And, you know, and Peel was the first film I made after those experiments and you know, and trying to understand that there was a subtle subtext language, you know, suddenly got it. And you know what? I've never enjoyed filmmaking again. Yeah, there are some moments, you know, when it's, you know, I've had it all there, but really they're rare. And, you know, the rest of it, it's like that one little question, you know, or that statement, there's no wide shots, you know. It's just there echoing and worrying me all the time. But, you know, I guess that's the suffering of the filmmaker.
So you were in film school already when you made Peel?
Yeah, it was my first year at film school when I made Peel, and I had been spending a year out of art school just dying to do another Super 8 or something, get them all in the frame again. And so when I got to film school, I was like, where's the equipment room? And there was a few of us like that, and I was like, down the hall to the equipment room and booking it out and trying to find out how to do it. And I ended up making Peel in my first year. And I mean, the editing experience was a bit the same, once I sort of did a bit better with the shots and everything, It was like, and it's all together. And people would come in and, they wouldn't see that. They'd just say some long, stringy old mess, And I had to learn the hard way around that you have to kind of just take any opportunity out for them to kind of fall through your net. And I learnt just so much in editing this little film here myself, because it was like, the story was, oh, Jane, she's working in some room over there on this hopeless, completely, dead piece of nonsense. And I don't know, it's a kind of great thing because no one expects anything, and then finally at the end of the year, working in the evenings because you had to do the normal course and stuff like that, I had the thing and no one recognised it. And, people did follow the story, and the Pye family, who I screened it to, are very tough judges. I mean, they're sweet in this movie. I had to call Katie Princess Pye. Princess Katie, would you mind? We did another take, the very sorry, humble servant has fucked up on that last shot. Because, they're redheads and they hate the sun. And, they just hated doing that. And I'd say, look, towards the end of it, I said, look, I know we're near the end of it, but I don't think I can handle this anymore. You're also unhappy and, I had bronchial asthma by this stage. I was going, you're also unhappy. I'm really ill. And they went, no, you don't understand. We want you to make us finish it. So it was an exercise in discipline.
Where did the idea for the film come from?
Well, really the inspiration, when you start out filmmaking like I was, you don't think about actors. They're so scary. You just don't even think about them, asking an actor to do anything. I mean, that sounds like very generous, but actually what you're really worried about is that they will do things, and you won't be able to stop them. Like they'll say, well, I mean, what do you know about motivation, or some other kind of technique thing that I didn't understand, and, and they'd be off doing their stuff, and I just would have these arguments. And this is my nightmare anyway, and I just wouldn't be going I can't handle it. So you get your friends who you can sort of handle. I learnt that lesson, actually. And it always impressed me how this particular family, I mean, that's Tim's son, just had this uncanny way of looking alike. They are so alike with the red hair and the pale skin, and they have a very combative relationship. I mean, the week before we started filming this, Katie threw Tim's TV on the ground and he ripped a skirt off her, and they hadn't talked, so...
Welcome to the set, right?
And, I had no skill in confrontation techniques, so it was just like to have been really nice, But, and there was a little story that actually happened in our family, which is very similar to the one that this is. And it's really just a portrait, this little film is a portrait of, family life, that family, those people. And you kind of have to have them doing something. So I thought about this incident that happened to our family when my brother threw a tissue by tissue out the window, It wasn't orange peel, and finally my father, who's incredibly good-natured, decided on one of his biannual displays of discipline, And when he does it, he does it. And we had to pull over the side of the road, and my brother was sent back to pick up all the tissues, which of course was ridiculous because they'd blown all over the place, And we were like left in the car waiting. So that was that.
Started from there. Could we go on to the next clip, please, from A Girl's Own Story, and then Sweetie. Before you went to film school, you went to art school, and I know you've done some painting. Can you talk about one of the things that's so striking here is the incredible juxtapositions of shots, the changes in frame and angle, moving from looming close-ups to weird long shots. What were you thinking about?
Well, Girl's Own Story really... It was a really sincere effort to try and describe that really painful transition in adolescence. To somehow get into... I mean, adolescence was a painful time for me. To get into the... And it also always felt like a really secret pain, you know, that it was unshareable. Didn't have the skills of discussion or how to talk about it, and your own friends were also suffering. It's like a grief for childhood and the whole complications of new emotions. And I really wanted to try and find a way to kind of share those secrets, and I guess it's a kind of arty way of trying to do it, you know. I mean, it was sincere too. I mean, some people were laughing and I was laughing too. At the same time, I was watching it and thinking, you know, I love those girls, you know. And I guess the considerations of the shots at that time was really to just try and get across the feelings that, you know, I was trying to talk about, and the confusions of trying to grapple with your parents' sexuality, lies, infidelities, your own desire to have special attention. I mean, the heater at the very end of that, I don't know, what do you call them, heaters here? Radiators? Or
Radiators, yeah.
Radiators. The radiator at the very end of that tracking shot was my own one from my room. And I just remember spending, like, so many hours sitting in front of it like it was a fire or something, you know, romantic. Just kind of warming myself, you know, like sitting over the top of it, sitting on top of it, you know. All these shots are just like clumsy efforts too. You know, and I say clumsy because, you know, sometimes they kind of have a little feeling about them, but really all I was trying to get at was those complex, you know, feelings. I mean, I guess this is the grim end of the Girl's Own Story, the front end's sort of more lively, you know.
Well, it always keeps you off balance. It's always, I mean, especially here at the end, you feel so disoriented, shot from shot. Yes,
I guess it's very intuitive how, in the end, that you choose a shot. There's, you're trying to, you know, look at the shot as it's been made, you know, as you're making it, as the camera person's doing it, as you've written your storyboard. I mean, storyboard for Girl's Own Story is, you know, all done shot for shot, very literal. And then I was too inexperienced really to do anything but just what I had on the piece of paper, you know, so it was all, I mean, shot for shot like that, exactly like that. And you just, when you're doing your storyboards, because I didn't even trust myself to look through the camera and feel, I was too, you know, overexcited and anxious and wound up to know what was going on. But, you know, at least when I was doing my drawings, I was more relaxed. And you're just trying to put in your head what's going to happen and whether that will give you the feeling, you know?
You work with Sally Bongers, who also shot Sweetie on this film.
Some of that was actually shot by Alex Proyas as well. And the music, you know, The Crow, the director of The Crow. And in fact, that's his hand at the end. Yeah. You know, touching the girl. But we couldn't touch those girls, they're too young, so it was his girlfriend, you know. and he wrote the music for it too.
Did the film always have the conception of ending with this musical number, which is so striking?
Yeah, I always love songs and often have songs and things. My very first, Super 8 Wonder film had a song in it too. And I can't sing and tune at all, so it's all kind of very weird that I love that. I just love human voices so much, I don't know why, I just love songs.
And where did you find the girls for the film? Were so terrific.
Well, in fact, the girl who plays the main girl was going to be played by Nicole Kidman, who was 14 at the time, 13, 14, and was so startlingly extraordinary at that time. And then suddenly she couldn't do it because she was overloaded with work, or maybe she thought the film was too weird or something, I don't know. But I wouldn't blame her. And she actually showed me recently the postcard I sent her, saying like, oh, well, hope maybe we can work together on perhaps something more classic. And I was very lucky to get Gabrielle Schornegg because she's such a great girl. I mean, she's so straightforward, but she's just got that passionate, intensity about her, and she was wonderful to work with, And all the girls were great. She used to just think I was deadly weird. She used to just pat me on the back or sit on my knee and say, Jane, you're such a weirdo. You're such a weirdo. I'm not going to be like anything like you when I grow up. I'm going to be...
And is that true, or has she...
I don't know, probably true, actually. I mean, Gabrielle kind of like sings in musicals and normally, and, I'm sure she's going to have a great life because she's just a really sensible and, compassionate human.
So what was the reaction to Girl's Own Story when it was done and got a chance to show it?
Well, the very first reaction was really incredibly disappointing. The film came back from the lab and I was shown it to about 10 students. Like, students are pretty competitive with each other, or there's that side of it which can be, well, you expect it anyway, but about 10 students like, what's she done, Go and have a look at what Campion's done, it's probably a load of shit. And, but, when they speak to you, it's like, hi, can I have a look, I'd love to see it. It sounds so interesting, And I'd be thinking, oh, yeah, sure, But I was very excited to see the whole thing put together, and so we had about 10 people, and we screened the movie, and, I remember one guy just ran out at the end of it, Like, just thought it was so hopeless he couldn't bear to talk to me. It was just like, what a load of rubbish you've made here, And he just couldn't bear to even speak to me, but I felt so great. I saw it and I thought, oh, Jane, you've done something for you, good on you, And I felt like I'd really made a film that I liked for me, and bits and pieces. And I just felt great, so even like the little looks of faces like, the, good. I knew they didn't like it, but it didn't really hurt me, not in a deep way. And then the real, I guess, public reception to the film was like in a situation with an audience about like this, maybe twice as much as what we've got here now tonight, in a theatre a bit like this. When the students all show their films, and I had Gabrielle with me, and I was really nervous how she would respond to it, especially if the audience was like, film students, because she's sort of, fairly exposed, and I felt pretty protective towards her. And so I was like, here it goes, And it was just a riot. It was the most encouraging single event of my film career, I think, just to see that people could like what you'd done. And they were clapping and yelling kind of all the way through so you could barely hear it, and other people were saying, "Shut up," so they could hear. And I was kind of quivering with excitement, I say I'm quivering because I've got a little baby daughter now, and she quivers. She does the same thing. She goes, but it was. I just thought, like, oh, you mean I can go on and make another one? This is really good. And I guess the audience were just a different kind. I mean, they weren't a general audience. This is obviously not a general audience film. But it was very encouraging.
Had you at that point already been thinking about Sweetie, or had the script already, or where did that? Because in many ways, I think of all your films, it seems to me the most natural connection. I know there's two friends in between, but Sweetie grows out of a lot of the concerns in this film.
Well, straight after I finished film school, I got an opportunity to work at the Women's Film Unit and made a piece of sort of semi-rubbish there. The problem, well, I'll talk about that another time, but I mean, there are some nice bits in the movie, but they really wanted a, what would they call it, sort of issue-based film, and I was going to get the job, I can tell you that. I was going to get it. But I'm not an issue-based filmmaker, and it really grated with me, and like all the bits which are of the issue are great. All the bits of the issue are really sticky. And the issue was sexual harassment in the workplace. It's obviously bad, What can you say? But the women running the committee, it was one of those really frustrating situations. So I had such a great story to give them, I had this story about this prostitute who died, a young girl, and all her fellow prostitutes were going to go out in a little dinghy and take her ashes and have a picnic and put them out at sea. That was going to be the situation, and they said, too black, terrible, And it was going to be like they were going to discuss their life and their work, And I thought that would have been good, but anyway. They chose something else. But where did that come from? Yeah, Sweetie. Well, it wasn't really until I went to Cannes that I really got the full blast of the fact that there was an audience for my movies. I thought, you're out in the world now, I better behave. You won't have a job ever. And when I went to Cannes, I thought, oh no, I could go on, doing this. In fact, I felt really obliged to, and so after that experience, I started gathering the material for Sweetie, and so that was really what got that going. And I'd also had the idea for piano by that stage, and was already developing the Janet Frame stuff. But I put Sweetie right up in front of all the others because I felt it was a real low-budget, high-risk film.
Good thing to start off with. Let's see that clip from Sweetie. So you were pegged somewhat coming out of film school after Girl's Own Story about being or wanting to make or being pegged to make women's films or films about women in a way. But all of your films, which center on women, drive the actresses to extraordinary limits. I can't think of another director, male or female, who's demanded so much of women in a very physical way. Can you talk somewhat about that, especially with regard to Genevieve Lemon in this film, because it's an amazing physical performance, aside from everything else.
I can't talk much about it because I don't even get that I'm doing that. I think it's just, it doesn't occur to me, like that I'm asking a lot. The only thing, I'm, physically quite modest, so I did feel for Genevieve and the nudity, up the tree with everybody in the neighbourhood looking anyway. And I kept going, well, we can do this, and we can do this, and Genevieve kept saying to me, Jane, I do not mind who sees me in the nude, okay? It's really just okay. But we did have the problem of the little boy seeing her in the nude. And he was very keen to see her in the nude. And, you know, we had to keep pants on and keep him away from looking, you know, da-da-da. But he kept saying, I want to see you without your pants on. And, I don't want to go into these things, but there was another funny bit too, where we used to give him, like, lollies, you know, which is probably a mistake, but if he's doing well, and one of the lollies that we gave him was like, you know, these tubes, you know, and one of the people that were looking after him, you know, he had this snake tube, and she grabbed it and gave it a, you know, had a bit of it, had a bite, and he was going, woo, cry. We were going like, oh God, he's going to go home and say, you know, they've been licking my snake, you know. We'll never get him coming back, you know. I know you write the stuff and then suddenly you have to make it.
Did you know Genevieve Lemon before you had done this, or?
Genevieve's actually a very close friend of mine still, and I see her a lot. I didn't know Genevieve, and Genevieve's got a really, you know, particular way of working. She never discusses anything. Her processes are a complete mystery to herself and to me. And I used to meet with her in a coffee bar and think, you know, like, well, we've got to get into this really deeply, Jen, so it's good that we can, like, start now, which is like, you know, 6 months beforehand or something. And it would say, so what do you think, you know, Sweetie's background would have been, you know? And she'd go, I start yawning. And I go, what's going on? Is she, like, not really want to do this? Or I just couldn't understand it. And she was, like, trying to be interested because she thought that, you know, maybe this was, you know, my way of working and I was trying to do her way of working. And, you know, finally, I just kind of found out that we weren't doing anyone's way of working. But that, you know, it's just ended up being based on a real friendship of, you know, trust and for my part, a real admiration of her work.
Did the screenplay change much during the course of the filming in terms of the vibes between Karen Colston and Genevieve Lemon or anything like that, or did it stay pretty close to your conception or to the screenplay?
I think the thing that really happened was that Karen and Genevieve have become best friends, and they still are, which is, funnily enough, what's happened with my sister and me too, you know, who used to fight a lot when we were young. The actors were extremely supportive and the crew were extremely difficult. That was the situation on Sweetie. Like, the crew were nuts.
These are the...
Some of the crew, not all the crew, you know. The rest of us were just intimidated.
You co-wrote the screenplay with Gerald Lee.
Gerard Lee, yeah.
Gerard Lee.
Yeah.
What was the process with that in terms of the co-writing? How did that work out?
Well, Gerard Lee and I were at film school together, and we lived together while we were there, and he's a writer, and he's a very funny guy. He's so charming, in not like Mr. Handsome way, but just so kind of sweet and honest, undercutting honest, but it's a little manipulated once you get the hang of it. But I loved his writing, and a lot of the stuff that we were trying to put into the film was stuff about our experiences together. And so I felt the material was shared by both of us, and asked him if he'd, you know, even though we were no longer actual partners, whether he'd like to work on the screenplay together. And after some, you know, like heavy negotiations, we, you know, got back together, became best friends again, and wrote this screenplay pretty effortlessly, really, you know.
What was the germ of the screenplay? The idea of the sisters or the general family?
Well, more or less all the material that's there, but sort of rearranged. I mean, I came to him with that, and he sort of gave it 6 out of 10 as a start point, you know. And I mean, he's kind of very laconic like that, and, you know, we said, well, we've got to get this up to 9, you know. And then we just tried to find the tone, and we'd play around. We went away and spent some time, and, you know, together, alone, and tried to find the characters. And then one day Sweetie popped up, and, you know, I think I was being Sweetie, and, you know, we just sort of discovered her and got her talking, and sort of got the others talking, and I don't know. I think I wrote the very rough first draft, and it was really pretty bad, very rough at that stage. And then I brought it to him, and then the two of us, over about a period of 3 weeks, put it back together better, much better.
Some writers in the States who spoke about the film spoke about it in terms of the family scene and the hint they saw of incest in the film. Is that something that you worked on consciously, or when you saw the film, did it come out to you?
Well, I have a very handsome father who I've not had any trauma with, but who I've always had my friends in love with. And so sex and parents and, things has always been around for me, like it's transgenerational. Yeah. If that means anything. And I just think so it's not a personal thing, no, but the character of Sweetie's dad, he's kind of like a hopeless innocent. I mean, and I guess the film criticises him quite severely because he nourishes all Sweetie's delusions. And, if anything, the thesis of it from my point of view was that love is, a stern master, and sometimes you have to be prepared to tell the truth and use some wisdom with it. And he had no access to anything, And so when Sweetie sort of baths him, obviously fiddles with him a bit too, it's like he couldn't handle that or even acknowledge it, Yeah. In fact, the guy is playing, the guy, he's just like an extra. He's never done an acting part before in his life. We just liked his eyebrows, And, he's never read the whole script. He just came in with these great big clunky, like it was almost an artwork. It was clunky bits of cardboard stuck onto his scenes. And, that was all he was going to look at.
It works really well because he does seem like an extra in a way in terms of all the drama going on.
This is going to go hand again.
Next, after Sweetie, you went on to the story of Janet Frame in Angel at My Table. What attracted you to wanting to write about or make a film about Janet Frame?
Her autobiography, and also I grew up. Janet Frame is like one of the important women writers in New Zealand. After Catherine Mansfield, I think you'd think about Janet Frame. And we always grew up with the story that Janet Frame was the writer who went mad and spent a lot of time in mental hospital, and there was a mental hospital that we used to drive past quite often to go to a little cottage that we had at the beach, and we always used to look up at that, and I used to think about Janet being in there. She wasn't actually in that one, and then I got old enough to read Owls Do Cry, and it's, an extraordinarily moving, poetic novel. And so I was very interested to hear that she was writing her autobiography because it was well known to everybody that her life was, full of drama, but she was also extraordinarily reclusive and nobody really knew what it was. And so Mum sent it over to me and I read the first book and I just stayed in bed and read it in a morning. And I just found it so, it's just her work, so honest and so much took me back to my own childhood. The honesty and the truth of it, I just felt so moved by it that I just wanted to make it more widely known or available, really just simply like that. I didn't really think I had anything to add or to better of it, but I just could perhaps look after it, Mm-hmm. So I tried to get hold of Janet, who lived not far from where my parents had a farm, and we set up a meeting and I went and talked to her, and I was still at film school, and it was a very awkward meeting of two, at that time, pretty awkward people. A lot of dropping of things and... and she's really eccentric, and she's also incredibly bright and together and a fantastic memory, which I don't have. And we, discussed literature together and the prospect of me perhaps making a film out of her biography, and she just said, well, I like the fact that you've come to see me and that you're, adventurous. You want to be adventurous about it. And So why don't you just wait until the other 2 books come out, and if you still like them, okay, you can do them. And just, I got myself a partner in Richard Peña, and the 2 of us really had done nothing before, but Janet trusted us just like that. And, the relationship remained very supportive and very good, all the way through.
Did she have any previous experience with the cinema? Had any other work been filmed, or had she ever written for the screen, or had any real interest in movies?
She loves cinema. She's a complete addict of it. And she's a complete addict of really high art cinema. Like last year, Marion Bad is her favourite movie. I hadn't even seen it. And, so she, she's kind of like so homey and housewifey and everything in the looks department. All she wants to talk about is like this really obscure, difficult cinema, wonderful cinema. So she also had a short a novella, State of Siege, made by Vincent Ward, and that was really nicely done. And so she'd had a good experience, and he was very honourable in relationship to her and always sent her, any money that he had got from it. So she had good experiences.
Let's see the clip from Angel at My Table. In Angel at My Table, of course, but also Piano and possibly one could even read Sweetie, there's a constant theme about women artists, obviously with Janet, with Ada and the piano as a pianist, and of course that final image of that figure suspended, tied to the piano underwater. I know that your mother was an actress and I think had a theater company too. Is there a way in which that idea about the problem of being a woman artist runs through your work? Could you talk about that and talk about its relationship maybe to this film?
That's another one I don't really understand. It's really hard for me to talk about because I don't. Some of these decisions or attractions are so intuitive that I don't really question them. And I guess all I can say is that I'm, naturally drawn to characters that more graphically express some stuff that I try and hide, like Janet's extreme shyness is a very overt expression of, my shyness and I think a lot of other people's as well. And I'm very grateful for her to put it out there like that and for me to, I don't know, be able to sort of somehow come to terms with something of my own. And also Janet's kind of, I love people that try and understand the world, I think it's the point of being alive. I still think it's the point of being alive, and when, the most terrible things have happened to me, it seems absolutely the point. That what you want to do is understand life, that there's nothing else for it, and if you can't do that, it's not worth it. And I guess I appreciate these women because they're in the struggle, they're trying. Janet's trying, Ada's trying, I don't know, Sweetie's trying. She's lost, but Kay's trying. Kay's trying, and Isabel Archer is trying too. And, maybe figuring it out at the moment, but I love people that, and that's true in life too, who don't just go, oh well, we're all here, make the most of it. Who do experience the pain of living and the joy of it and do things in extreme, and I love them because they become kind of soulmates for me, they're fellow passengers and people that you can feel human with, and that the collegiate quality of being human is something that is worthwhile in life, so warming.
As I said, you come from a theater family, and so much of your work seems so tied to these great performances that you get from these actresses and actors. Can you talk about that process of finding them, especially in this case where you have a real person who you met and knew and felt you wanted in a certain way to create an homage to or to understand. How is that in terms of your work with Carrie Fox?
Oh, can you say? Sorry.
So much of your work depends so heavily on these actors and actresses who you choose who really become the roles. And I was wondering, especially in this film where you're dealing with a real person, that in a sense you're bringing Carrie Fox into and Carrie Fox has to become. Could you talk a bit about that?
Well, Carrie Fox was a girl of 23, 21, 22, 23, I think. And when we chose her, she'd never done a film before. And she had such an extraordinary challenge, and I was really lucky in Carrie because she's got some extraordinary instincts that supported both of us. And then the next, I mean, I didn't really know what to do either. All I could say together was with Carrie was like, "This is a big job, Carrie. I've never done anything like this with anybody." And she said, "I've never done anything like it either." And we said, "Well, let's work it out, you know." And it's just becoming friends. And I think the first stuff we had to shoot, because the mental hospital which was a real mental hospital, was being razed. We had to shoot that in the first week, and that was pretty torturous for her. And she was really in tears a lot at the end of that. And I mean, I guess I was too, in support of her. And it's you just try and be friends with them and support them through the process. And it's a subtle thing. And with good actors, it's so great if you can be there sometime one day when they're just searching for a little something to help them through, and give them the word or give them the support or something. But most often they find it themselves, given the space. And you just protect them from those moments if you can, where they don't quite know what to do. Just the same as anyone would when I don't quite know how to shoot a scene. I'll say to everyone, "I don't know how to do this one," And an actor will say to me sometimes, "I don't know what to do here." And that's when you help them. But most of the time, you're there and just enjoying what they're going to show you. With Carrie, it was a little different because she's was so new that I think I was more overbearing with her. And she was very good-natured about accepting that, and possibly it worked for her too. I mean, again, Carrie and I are like sisters still, really fond of her, and she's gone on and very aggressively pursued her, continue with her career.
How did you prepare for, it's amazing to hear that this was one of the first scenes you shot, because it's, for me, in so many ways, kind of the heart of the film, to see exactly what this woman went through. How did you prepare for it, and what did you want to bring to these particular scenes in the mental hospital?
Well, I'd been to mental hospital myself, not as a patient, but as a visitor, and read other works of Janet Frame where she more intensively describes her experiences, which most of these scenes were drawn from. And, also visited some of the mental hospitals where she was patient, and some of those really just chilled me completely to the bone. These little places where they sent them coloured like candy colours, cheerful pinks and blues, where you were sent for a week or so to think about things. Just a little door, I knew the experience practically killed her and has killed many other people. It's such a difficult area, mental health. It is such a difficult area, and in some ways I feel we've done electroconvulsive treatment a disservice. It's a fantastic tool nowadays with anaesthetic for a lot of impossible cases. It's just that without it, it was very cruel. And especially in Janet's case, because she wasn't schizophrenic, or probably doesn't cure schizophrenia anyway, or control it very well anyway. But so it was particularly bad. And I just felt that to understand the courage that she had to regain her life, you had to see, it had to be bad. We could have made it worse. We had the material to make it a lot worse. But it's just like finding the balance so you're not so overwhelmed by it that in a viewing situation like here.
Where, for me, it becomes more overwhelming is we didn't continue the clip, but in the next few minutes you see that while she's there, her books are being published, and in fact she wins a major award.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, while she had, we're not really showing here, but she was in and out of hospital all the time, and she wrote a collection of short stories, which are just brilliant. And they were published, and she just was spared from having a lobotomy because someone in the hospital had read that she won a prize. But I mean, it's, very scary.
So after you finished film school, you had these 3 projects. You had Sweetie, you had Angel at My Table, and then the piano. What was your preparation or the idea behind wanting to do the piano? Wow. I wanted to do something in the Wuthering Heights romantic style. I wanted to do a story that was romantic from a feminine point of view. A bit like in the Girl's Own Story thing, I felt that there was a way of understanding romance that women had access to women are so much more experts on it, Well, I believe, because they have to do all the plotting, Get the guy to pick the phone up, I mean, the guy doesn't pick the phone up. The girl's got him to do that, I suppose I just wanted to tell a story, a complex, romantic, sexual story from a woman's point of view. I mean, one of my aims when I went to film school was to make perhaps pornographic movies for women. And, I mean, lightheartedly. Lighthearted pornographic movies for women.
I guess this is what this is. And I'm kind of in love with the New Zealand landscape and its power, growing up in it. And I really wanted to share that with people outside of New Zealand, to have the opportunity to see it. And I feel like it works in a similar way to the English moors, in its extremeness and its harshness, and sort of the sense of being right at the other end of the world, this darkness. And I've always been fascinated by that particular time in New Zealand history, when it was being colonised and the Maoris were starting to cross-dress, in European gear, and it gave me a big opportunity to explore all that.
It's interesting. It's actually one of the things that I love so much about the film was that sense of the new world, of this virgin land that these people were landing in, the beginnings of their relationship with the Maoris and whatever. In what sense, or how could you talk a little bit about your relationship to that idea of Australia, New Zealand culture in some larger sense? I mean, one speaks, I guess, quickly about the idea of Western culture and where Australia and New Zealand fit into that. But where do you see, in a sense, your own work coming out of traditions or ideas that stem from that part of the world?
Well, I'm a colonial girl, and come from a colonial background, which actually puts me back in England, if I keep going back. But it doesn't feel like that. It feels like it all began with that landing, in a way, because the English don't want to know about us, in the sense of, history, like, whoa, you're not from here anymore, too rough. And I guess it's trying to understand that, and at the same time, like, I love the Bronte sisters' books, and they were writing at the very same time as New Zealand was being colonised. One of their best friends was a colonist out there, a woman on her own running a shop, and she got sent, in fact, by Charlotte Bronte, Wuthering Heights, the year it came out. And I don't know, I just sort of felt a kinship between all those things, and about, you know, being a New Zealand girl and...
Okay. Let's see the clip from the piano. It's amazing that shot with the piano and all the things on the beach, it's kind of like the founding myth or something of New Zealand. When you're talking about this combination of Wuthering Heights and this idea about the beginnings of New Zealand, at what point did you decide to introduce the Maoris as a real element within the film? Were they always there in your mind, and how do you think that they worked in the film for you?
Well, you can't tell a story about early New Zealand without the Maoris. It's their country. And that was a really big challenge. I mean, it's at the time that I made this film, there wasn't... it was perceived as a very, very sensitive and very delicate operation to work with Maori people on a Pakeha film about, in a situation in the past, set in the past. Because, well, Maoris have been so badly abused by our settlers, and currently still by government promises broken so often, that there's, you know, a lot of distrust. And they are naturally, culturally extremely warm people, and when they, you know, I mean, they used to call Queen Victoria Mother. You know, that was the style of trust that they had in us as colonial, you know, founders or whatever, and they loved her like that, you know. And they were really disenfranchised by that, so, you know, their suspicion is well founded. But nevertheless, I wanted to do the story, and obviously had to have Maoris in it, and, you know, because I'm not a Maori person, I really couldn't write a story which had the Maoris in a, you know, incredibly prominent role. It was hard enough as it was, and I don't know enough about them, you know. I hadn't infiltrated Maori circles enough at that stage to know. My father worked with a lot of Maori people in the theatre, so he had a very good reputation. That all goes for quite a lot because of him. I could get access to elders in the Maori scene who would be prepared to help me. And Maoris also have a big respect for cultural achievement, and I had done the Janet Frame story at the time, and even though I was a woman, which is not a terribly good thing in Maori culture, you know, that was okay, I'd done something. And I was given a lot of respect for that, otherwise I think it would have probably been impossible. And then, you know, I just had to negotiate to find someone to support me who ended up becoming a friend. And, you know, he was pretty tough on me to start with, you know, like, what you've written here is just total bullshit, you know. I said, I know, you know. I know, I don't know. It's just something in there. Can you help me make it authentic? And, you know, he did. He helped me as best as he could, and... you know, it's not... well, I hope it is kind of tokenism in the sense that they don't have a really, you know, crucial roles, but I just didn't feel I had the place to do that either, you know.
They seem almost... chorus is the wrong word, but there's a way in which you get their sense of observation of these people and what's going on that I think is
I tried to give them they are like a Greek chorus in the sense that they have a kind of, they have a totally different perspective on the drama that's going on with the other people. I mean, there were stories that I read when I was researching it, you know, where they just couldn't understand the Europeans' lack of emotion, you know. When Maori people see each other after a long time, they greet each other and cry, you know, like in the old days, you know. And that was like normal, and because the Europeans thought this was just such a, you know, cultural gap there. And the Maori people couldn't understand how the Europeans could live alone, sleep alone, you know. Stuff like that. That was just totally weird for them.
And what in the scenes that they finally appear in, did any of the actors have a participation in terms of lines or anything like that?
Well, by that time, I had Wazzy working with me, and he was a very strict master. He's like, you know, there's a handful of people that speak Maori language as it was spoken, who classically, and Wazzy is one of them. And he taught Harvey to speak Maori, and he tried to speak the Maoris teach the Maoris to speak Maori, because most of them don't speak Maori anymore. And he would get incredibly pissed off with them. So there ain't no ad-libbing amongst that lot, I can tell you. They had enough trouble sticking to his lines, you know, and he would be after them, because his ambition was to make the Maoris, you know, we're going to steal the show, was his line. And you know, he'd say, you know, bugger you all, you know, we've got Harvey there, he can speak Maori better than you, you know, you buggers, you know.
And on that note, I'd like to thank Jane Campion very much, and thank you very much.